For more on this, we're joined by Carin Zissis. She is the editor-in-chief of Council of the Americas Online, an organization whose goal is to promote free trade and open markets throughout the Americas. So first of all, thank you for joining us, Carin. And I want to ask you what you think the main topic on the agenda is for these three leaders.
Thank you very much for having me on, Dwight. I will say that we've seen news in recent days that demonstrates a little bit of what this agenda is all about. On Thursday last week, President Biden made some announcements about immigration policy in the United States. And as we know, he traveled to El Paso, making his first trip since he took office as president to the border region. There's a great deal of pressure in the United States around immigration, given that there have been a record number of apprehensions at the border. So we know that immigration is going to be really at the top of the agenda from the U.S. perspective. We expect also there to be a great focus on security issues. Ovidio Guzman, the son of El Chapo, was detained last week as well. And we, as you know, we just heard from the Canadian Prime Minister. We expect that all three leaders will be talking about economic issues and trade.
Talking about economic issues and protectionist American policies was one of the things they were worried about. The three leaders all gathered at the White House in November 2021. Has progress been made since then on those issues?
You know, that's a great question. So much has happened since 2021. We have to remember that the last time these three leaders came together, the pandemic was really going strong. It was right before the Omicron wave. They had to actually socially distance. And a lot of what was set out during that time was focused on the pandemic still. So we've now had over a year happen. We're looking at the potential for recession. We've had the crisis in Ukraine occur since then. And there's a great deal of pressure on these three countries to now make some progress that they did start on. They did set out on the agenda. Has enough progress been made? There have been a lot of challenges since then. But there is going to be pressure for these countries to come together and figure that out, because together they account for a third of global GDP. So we will see economic issues, I imagine, as they come together, really being a top focus issue.
Disputes within this arrangement are always part of the issue. Last summer, we saw a formal dispute carried out when it came to Mexico's tightening on its energy market. You know, talks to resolve the dispute began last year. How will all of that then shape this meeting moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really important issue in these discussions. Both Canada and the United States raised concerns about Mexican energy policy, which favors the electricity company and Pemex, the oil company. And so a big issue has been that concern around a turn to statism in Mexico. The president there, López Obrador, often referred to as AMLO, really takes a statist approach to energy policy.
Yeah, he's a nationalist.
And he's taken very much that role. And as we know, Prime Minister Trudeau raised concerns about this before the trip. You know that Canada has invested $13 billion in energy infrastructure and $5 billion in Mexico for renewables from Canadian companies. And so we know that this is something that Prime Minister Trudeau is feeling domestic pressure on. We know that American companies as well, U.S. companies as well, have placed pressure on the White House around this issue. So we can be certain this is going to be top of the agenda. In October, there was a possibility that they were going to be taking the next steps towards applying tariffs on Mexico. They decided to continue a dialogue. And in December, they kind of came up with an outline to come to a solution. So that's the question is going to be, are they going to be able to forge ahead and come to some of that agreement as they meet in the next couple of days?
You mentioned the border earlier, and there is some fear that that problem may overshadow all the issues we have as part of these three. But you mentioned this too. Last week, we saw the cartel fuel violence in Mexico after the arrest of Guzman's son. They were shooting at planes. How does something like that shift the tone of this summit when this is going on the streets while the leaders are meeting inside?
Yeah, absolutely. There are very complicated security issues that will be taking a lot of attention and are surrounding, kind of as a backdrop to this summit. We know that in the United States, there is a huge amount of pressure around drug overdoses. There were 108,000 drug
fentanyl.
overdoses in the United States. And the majority of them were synthetic opiates. Fentanyl has really driven that. So that's a concern from the U.S. side. From the Mexico side, there's a concern about arms smuggling.
Thank you.
About 70% of the weapons that are traced back, that are captured by authorities in Mexico, are traced back to the United States. Mexico has much more restrictive gun policy than the United States does. So, in fact, the Mexican government has brought 2 lawsuits against gun manufacturers and distributors in the United States. So some of this violence we see in Mexico, from a Mexican standpoint, there's a concern of weapons coming from the United States and fueling that as well. So both sides have their concerns and are going to try to find some solutions.
And they really do, because that demand for that fentanyl isn't driving it. It's just a big circle. We keep going round and round. That was Carin Zissis. She's the editor-in-chief of Council of the Americas Online, and she was kind enough to join us tonight from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Carin.
Thank you so much, Dwight. Pleasure to talk with you.